Let's get something straight. If you've ever been ghosted, stonewalled, or left in a confusing silence that made you question everything, you're not crazy. You're dealing with someone who's emotionally wired to run. And today, we're calling it out. We're talking about avoidance, the people who crave connection but fear intimacy, who say they need space and then disappear into it like it's their job. And the one move they've mastered like a professional escape artist: no contact. But here's the truth. Most people miss. This isn't just a boundary. For avoidance, silence becomes a coping mechanism, a hit of control, a fix of safety. It's not just what they do, it's what they're addicted to. And when you understand why, everything changes. Let's break it wide open. People with avoidant attachment styles didn't wake up one day and decide to fear intimacy or push people away. They were shaped that way. To understand why avoidants are addicted to no contact, we have to start at the very beginning, how their emotional blueprint was formed. And it's not about blame. It's about understanding the programming that runs silently in the background of their relationships. Avoidant individuals often grow up in environments where emotional expression is either discouraged, ignored, or even punished. They may have had caregivers who were emotionally unavailable, distant, overly critical, or simply overwhelmed. These caregivers might have provided for physical needs, but failed to offer consistent emotional support. As a result, the child learned a powerful but painful lesson: my emotions are too much, and needing closeness leads to disappointment or rejection. So instead of reaching out for connection, they learn to self-soothe, to withdraw, and to rely only on themselves. This becomes their emotional survival strategy. They build walls not to hurt others, but to protect themselves. The brain wires itself to anticipate emotional vulnerability as a threat. And when closeness feels unsafe, emotional distance becomes the comfort zone. From an early age, avoidants begin to believe that independence equals safety and intimacy equals risk. So they learn to disconnect from their feelings and suppress their needs. They stop reaching out, they shut down instead of speaking up. And when things get too close, too intense, or too vulnerable, they instinctively pull away. Fast forward to adulthood, and this pattern shows up in romantic relationships. At first, the avoidant may seem charming, confident, maybe even emotionally available. But the moment the connection deepens, when real intimacy starts to form, they start to feel overwhelmed. Their nervous system interprets this closeness as a danger signal. They may not even realize it's happening consciously. All they know is they suddenly feel the urge to retreat. And that's where the no contact comes in. That silence isn't random. It's their way of hitting the emotional off switch. It's not just about space, it's about escaping what feels like a threat to their identity, their autonomy, and their sense of emotional control. It's important to understand that this isn't manipulation in the classic sense. It's more like muscle memory. It's a conditioned automatic response. They're not trying to hurt you. They're trying to avoid pain themselves. But in doing so, they often leave a trail of confusion, rejection, and abandonment behind them. The people on the receiving end of their silence feel like they did something wrong, like love just vanished, like they were never truly seen or valued. But what's really happening is that the avoidant is following a script that was written long before you ever met. And here's the kicker. Because this pattern worked for them as children, it helped them survive emotionally. They cling to it as adults, even when it costs them meaningful relationships. Avoidants may say they want love, and many genuinely do. But their actions are guided by a subconscious belief that love isn't safe. So the closer they get, the stronger the urge to push away. They disconnect, disappear, or go cold. Not because they don't care, but because caring feels too risky. This is why they're drawn to no contact. It gives them the space to breathe, to reset, to feel like they're back in control of their emotions. But what they often don't see is that this distance is also what keeps them lonely, disconnected and unfulfilled. That emotional independence they prize so highly is actually a prison disguised as freedom. Understanding the avoidant attachment blueprint is the key to unlocking this entire cycle. Once you see how deeply this pattern is wired, you can start to have compassion, not just for them, but for yourself. If you've ever chased after someone who kept pulling away, you can stop taking their silence personally and start seeing it as a symptom of unhealed emotional wounds. And maybe, just maybe, you can stop trying to decode their silence and start focusing on the love, safety, and connection you truly deserve. Silence, for an avoidant, is not just the absence of words, it's a carefully crafted shield. It's a protective strategy built over time to keep emotional discomfort at bay. While it may look like indifference or coldness from the outside, it's actually the only language they know when things start to feel overwhelming. When emotions rise or vulnerability creeps in, silence becomes their default defense mechanism. It's not that they don't feel, it's that feeling becomes too much too fast, and the only way they know to stay safe is to disconnect. At the core of this behavior is emotional dysregulation. Avoidants often have a hard time identifying, processing, or expressing emotions, not because they don't have them, but because they learned early on that expressing feelings either led to nothing or resulted in emotional punishment. So they adapted. They taught themselves to shut down instead of speak up, to turn inward instead of reaching out. And eventually that silence started to feel like strength. It became a way to stay in control when everything inside felt chaotic. What many people misunderstand is that avoidants don't choose silence just to hurt others. They use it because it's what their nervous system has been conditioned to do. When tension rises during conflict, emotional closeness, or even intimacy, their body can go into a kind of shutdown mode. This isn't always a calculated decision. It's a reflex, like someone flinching when touched unexpectedly. Silence becomes their armor, their escape hatch, and their method of emotional regulation all at once. This silence can show up in different ways. Sometimes it's a total disappearance, what people often call ghosting. Other times it's a slower withdrawal, fewer texts, shorter responses, an emotional wall that keeps getting taller. The avoidant may justify it to themselves by saying they need space or time to think. But what's really happening is they're avoiding the discomfort that comes with emotional exposure. Talking about feelings, resolving conflict, being open and vulnerable. These are all perceived as threats, not because the other person did something wrong, but because the avoidance internal system is wired to treat closeness as dangerous territory. And here's where the cycle becomes damaging. The person on the receiving end of that silence often feels rejected, abandoned, or punished. They might try harder, reach out more, or even beg for communication. But the more someone pushes for connection, the more the avoidant retreats. It's like quicksand. The more you fight to pull them closer, the deeper they sink into silence. From the outside, it looks like emotional cruelty. From the inside, it feels like survival. The silence also serves another hidden function. It creates distance that allows the avoidant to reset emotionally when they're alone and disconnected. They don't have to manage the intensity of someone else's needs or feelings. They don't have to explain themselves, risk being misunderstood, or face their own vulnerability. In silence, they feel in control again. And for someone who grew up feeling emotionally out of control, that control is everything. But the cost of using silence as a defense mechanism is high. Relationships require communication, repair, and mutual vulnerability. Silence prevents all of that. It freezes progress, deepens misunderstandings, and causes emotional damage to everyone involved. The avoidant may feel temporary relief, but long-term, it only reinforces their fear of closeness and sabotages the very connection they often secretly crave. And for the other person, that silence can feel like emotional abandonment, a wound that keeps reopening every time the pattern repeats. It's also important to note that this silence doesn't only happen in romantic relationships. It can show up in friendships, family dynamics, and even at work. Avoidants often struggle with confrontation, feedback, or emotionally charged conversations in any context. When faced with emotional complexity, silence offers a way out, a way to delay, avoid, or deflect the discomfort. Breaking this pattern starts with awareness. Avoidants need to recognize that silence may feel safe to them, but it's often harmful to others. They have to learn that discomfort isn't danger, and that emotional connection doesn't have to mean losing themselves. And for those dealing with an avoidant person, understanding this silence as a defense, not as rejection, can help depersonalize the experience and bring clarity. It doesn't mean tolerating emotional unavailability, but it does mean seeing the silence for what it really is, a coping strategy rooted in fear, not a reflection of your worth. Silence isn't strength, it's a signal. And the more we understand what it's trying to protect, the better we can navigate relationships that feel stuck in the quiet. When someone with an avoidant attachment style chooses no contact, it's not just about wanting space or needing time alone. It's about creating a sense of control in a world that often feels unpredictable and emotionally overwhelming. This illusion of control is a core reason why avoidants become addicted to no contact. For them, maintaining distance isn't just a preference, it's a powerful coping mechanism that helps manage anxiety and emotional discomfort. Understanding this helps us see that no contact isn't simply about pushing people away, it's about holding on to a fragile sense of stability amid emotional chaos. Avoidants grew up learning that relying on others for emotional support can be risky. When they were young, expressing needs or emotions may have led to rejection, disappointment, or unpredictability from caregivers. This early experience taught them that vulnerability equals loss of control. So, to protect themselves, they built an internal system designed to keep emotions at arm's length. They believe that by controlling how much they reveal and how close they let others get, they can avoid being hurt. In other words, control feels like safety. When an avoidant feels overwhelmed by the demands of intimacy or emotional closeness, the instinct to pull away kicks in. No contact becomes their way of resetting the emotional scale. It creates a space where they can breathe, think, and regain the upper hand over feelings they perceive as threatening. This break isn't just physical, it's emotional and psychological. It gives them a sense of autonomy and power. They get to decide when, how, and if they'll re-engage, which feels reassuring compared to the vulnerability of being fully open. This sense of control is intoxicating, which is why no contact can feel addictive. The avoidant experiences a kind of relief in the silence. They feel less exposed, less vulnerable, and more in command of their world. It's like hitting the pause button on emotional intensity. The danger they fear, being overwhelmed or engulfed by feelings, is temporarily avoided. The problem is that this relief is short-lived and comes at a cost. The more they retreat, the more isolated they become, and the deeper the disconnect grows. Yet, the pull of control is strong enough to keep them repeating the pattern. There's also a cognitive side to this illusion of control. Avoidants often tell themselves stories that justify the no contact, like "I need space to think," or "I can't handle this right now." These thoughts help them maintain the belief that stepping away is the rational, mature choice. But underneath those thoughts is an emotional undercurrent. Fear of being vulnerable, fear of losing independence, fear of being dependent on someone else's emotional availability. No contact feeds the belief that they're in control of their emotions and their environment, even if it means sacrificing closeness. This illusion of control also creates a paradox. Avoidants want connection, but they're terrified of losing control in the process. So they swing between wanting closeness and needing distance. This push-pull dynamic is exhausting, not just for the avoidant, but for everyone involved. When they reach out, they might appear warm and engaged, but as soon as the relationship feels too intense or demanding, the urge to regain control through distance and silence resurfaces. No contact becomes their safety net, their way of hitting the emotional reset button before things spiral too far. The illusion of control explains why no contact is rarely about true healing or healthy boundary setting for avoidance. It's less about thoughtful space and more about emotional self-protection. While it might seem like they're practicing self-care, they're often stuck in a loop of avoidance. The space they create is not an opportunity for growth, but a shield against discomfort. It allows them to postpone dealing with the underlying fears and unresolved wounds that keep them stuck in emotional withdrawal. Breaking free from this cycle means learning to tolerate uncertainty and vulnerability without feeling the need to flee. It means redefining what control looks like, not as the absence of discomfort, but as the ability to stay present and connected even when emotions are messy. For avoidants, this is a huge challenge because it requires rewiring deeply ingrained survival instincts. It means practicing trust and emotional risk-taking, even when it feels scary. For those on the outside, understanding the avoidance need for control can be a game changer. It helps shift the perspective from blaming or resenting their distance to recognizing it as a coping mechanism. This awareness doesn't mean accepting unhealthy patterns indefinitely, but it does open the door to more compassionate communication and setting boundaries that honor both parties' needs. Ultimately, the illusion of control is what fuels the avoidance addiction to no contact. It's a temporary fix that soothes anxiety, but also traps them in a cycle of emotional isolation. The real healing begins when they realize that true control comes not from shutting others out, but from embracing connection with all its unpredictability and vulnerability, and trusting themselves to handle whatever comes. When avoidant individuals engage in no contact, what they are really seeking is a sense of control in a situation that feels emotionally overwhelming and unpredictable. This illusion of control is a central reason why they become addicted to no contact. It's not merely about wanting to be alone or taking a break. It's about managing their inner anxiety and discomfort by creating emotional distance that makes them feel safe. To them, control feels like security, even if that control comes at the expense of meaningful connection. From a young age, avoidants learned that expressing emotions and depending on others can lead to disappointment or rejection. Their caregivers may have been emotionally distant, inconsistent, or dismissive. This early experience programs their brain to associate vulnerability with danger. As a result, they develop a protective system that prioritizes self-reliance and emotional detachment. Control becomes their way to avoid being hurt. If they can regulate how close others get, what they reveal, and when they engage, they believe they can prevent the pain of emotional overwhelm. No contact is the perfect tool for maintaining this sense of control. When they pull away, avoidants create a bubble where they can regulate their feelings without interference from others' emotional demands. Silence means they don't have to answer difficult questions, engage in uncomfortable conversations, or risk exposing their deeper vulnerabilities. This distance allows them to reset, to calm their nervous system, and to feel like they're back in charge. The ability to initiate and end contact on their terms gives them a powerful sense of autonomy. This feeling of control is addictive because it provides immediate relief from emotional distress. When avoidants face intimacy or conflict, their instinct is to retreat. No contact acts like a reset button, halting emotional intensity and giving them breathing room. It reduces the feeling that they are losing themselves or being engulfed by the relationship. This relief becomes a reinforcing loop. The more overwhelmed they feel, the more they seek distance. The more distance they get, the safer they feel, at least temporarily. However, this sense of control is an illusion because it comes with significant trade-offs. While they might feel safe behind the wall of no contact, avoidants also experience loneliness, missed opportunities for connection, and unresolved emotions. The control they gain through silence actually deepens their emotional isolation. And ironically, this isolation can increase their anxiety and fear of intimacy over time, making them more dependent on the very defense mechanism they use to avoid pain. The cognitive side of this illusion is important to understand as well. Avoidants often justify their no contact by telling themselves they need space or time to think. These thoughts help maintain the belief that they are making a rational, mature choice rather than reacting out of fear. But beneath those justifications lies a deep emotional reaction: fear of vulnerability, fear of losing independence, and fear of being emotionally dependent on someone else. This fear drives the need to control the situation by controlling distance. This need for control creates a paradox. Avoidants want closeness but are terrified of losing control in the process. This leads to a push-pull cycle where they reach out and then withdraw, sometimes repeatedly. Each withdrawal is an attempt to reclaim control when the relationship feels too intense or demanding. No contact becomes a familiar escape hatch, a way to avoid the discomfort of true emotional engagement. Because no contact serves primarily as a tool for emotional self-protection rather than healthy boundary setting, avoidants often get stuck in this cycle. They may appear to be taking care of themselves, but really they are avoiding the deeper emotional work necessary for growth and connection. The space they create is not used to process feelings or heal wounds. It is used to delay confronting fears and vulnerabilities. Breaking free from this pattern requires a new relationship with control. Instead of equating control with emotional distance, avoidants need to learn that true control means being able to stay present with uncomfortable feelings and maintain connection despite uncertainty. This is challenging because it means rewiring years of conditioning that taught them to flee rather than engage. It requires developing trust in themselves and others and accepting that vulnerability is not weakness but a path to genuine intimacy. For partners and loved ones, Understanding this illusion of control helps shift perspective. Instead of feeling rejected or blaming the avoidant for their silence, it becomes clearer that no contact is a coping strategy rooted in fear. This awareness opens the door to compassion and more effective communication, even if it doesn't immediately change the pattern. It also helps in setting boundaries that protect one's own emotional health without fueling the avoidance fear. The avoidance addiction to no contact is fueled by a desperate need to feel in control when emotions feel threatening. It's a temporary refuge that offers relief but ultimately keeps them trapped in isolation. True freedom and healing come when they realize that control is not about shutting others out, but about embracing connection with trust, courage, and the willingness to face emotional uncertainty head-on. When someone has an avoidant attachment style, emotional intensity can feel like a wildfire, too big, too fast, and impossible to control. This overwhelming surge of feelings triggers a shutdown response that is deeply ingrained in their nervous system. Unlike people who can lean into emotions and use them to build connection, avoidants often experience emotions as threats to their stability and autonomy. This is why emotional intensity leads to an avoidant shutdown, a protective mechanism designed to keep emotional pain at a distance. From early childhood, avoidants learn that strong emotions, whether their own or others, can be dangerous. They might have grown up with caregivers who responded unpredictably to emotional expression or who dismissed their feelings altogether. Because of this, intense emotions don't signal connection or safety to them. Instead, they represent risk and vulnerability. Their brains and bodies get wired to react with alarm, preparing them to defend themselves by shutting down emotionally whenever things get too intense. This shutdown doesn't mean they're numb or don't care. On the contrary, it's a survival response. When faced with emotional overload, whether it's conflict, deep conversations, or displays of affection that feel too close, they instinctively pull away, retreat, or go silent. Their nervous system interprets the intensity as a threat, triggering a fight, flight, or freeze reaction. Often, avoidants freeze or flee through withdrawal and silence rather than fighting back. This withdrawal is what we call the avoidant shutdown. During this shutdown, avoidants suppress their own feelings and needs, distancing themselves not only from the other person, but also from their internal emotional experience. They compartmentalize or minimize emotions as a way to maintain control and protect themselves from being overwhelmed. This creates a false sense of calm, but it's a calm that comes at the cost of true connection and emotional honesty. Because this response is so automatic and deeply embedded, avoidants often aren't fully aware of what they're doing or why. They may genuinely believe that pulling away is the healthiest choice for everyone involved, even though it creates confusion and hurt. This unconscious pattern makes it hard for them to stay present in emotionally charged moments or to communicate their needs effectively. The avoidant shutdown also creates a feedback loop. The more intense the emotional experience, the stronger their urge to retreat. But the more they retreat, the less opportunity there is for emotional regulation through connection. Instead of working through discomfort with support and understanding, they reinforce the belief that emotions are dangerous and closeness is risky. This keeps the cycle spinning, making intimacy feel impossible or undesirable. For the people who love avoidance, this shutdown can feel like rejection or abandonment. When an avoidant withdraws during emotional intensity, it often triggers feelings of confusion, hurt, and frustration in their partner. The partner may interpret the silence as disinterest or coldness, not realizing it's a protective response. This misinterpretation can lead to conflict, pushing the avoidant further into shutdown and distance. This cycle is painful on both sides. Avoidants feel trapped between wanting closeness and fearing it. They want to be understood and loved, but their instinct to protect themselves gets in the way. The people around them want connection, but often feel shut out or dismissed. Without awareness and intervention, this push-pull dynamic can erode trust and deepen emotional wounds. Healing this pattern requires patience, empathy, and self-awareness from both the avoidant and their loved ones. Avoidants need to learn how to tolerate emotional intensity without shutting down to stay present, even when feelings are uncomfortable. This is not easy because it means rewiring decades of learned survival responses. It involves practicing vulnerability gradually, trusting that emotions won't destroy them, and discovering new ways to self-soothe without retreating. At the same time, partners and friends need to recognize that the shutdown is not personal or malicious. It's a defense mechanism rooted in fear. Approaching avoidance with patience and reassurance, rather than anger or blame, can help reduce their need to escape. Creating a safe space where emotions can be expressed without judgment encourages avoidants to lower their defenses over time. This is why emotional intensity is such a critical battleground in avoidant relationships. It's not about suppressing feelings or avoiding vulnerability forever, but about learning to engage with emotions in a way that feels manageable. When avoidants start to recognize that emotional intensity doesn't have to lead to shutdown, that feelings can be processed, shared, and healed, they open the door to deeper connection and growth. The avoidant shutdown is a survival strategy gone into overdrive. It's a powerful response that kept them safe in childhood, but now limits their ability to fully connect as adults. Understanding this shutdown response helps explain why avoidance can seem distant or cold when emotions run high, and also why no contact and silence feel so natural to them. It's their nervous system's way of protecting a vulnerable self that's scared of being engulfed by feeling too much. Recognizing this is the first step toward breaking the cycle and creating relationships where emotional intensity can be met with openness rather than fear. One of the most challenging aspects for avoidant individuals in relationships is the paradoxical dynamic between their desire for independence and their deep-seated fear of abandonment. This contradiction lies at the heart of why avoidants often engage in no contact. It's not simply about wanting space or rejecting intimacy, but about managing the overwhelming tension between wanting closeness and fearing loss. This tension creates a push and pull cycle that can be exhausting and confusing, both for the avoidant and those around them. Avoidants highly value autonomy. Independence is central to their identity because it represents safety and self-protection. From early on, they learned that relying on others emotionally could lead to disappointment, vulnerability, or rejection. As a result, they place a premium on controlling their own emotional world and minimizing dependence on others. Maintaining distance in relationships is one way they protect this independence. No contact allows them to reinforce their boundaries and reclaim a sense of self that feels threatened by closeness. However, beneath this strong need for independence is a fragile fear of abandonment, a fear they often work hard to hide, even from themselves. This fear is subtle and sometimes unconscious, but it shapes much of their behavior. While they push people away to avoid getting hurt, they simultaneously worry about being left alone. This creates a deep internal conflict. The very act of distancing themselves to stay safe can trigger feelings of loneliness and rejection. This tension explains why avoidants can become addicted to no contact. It's a way to manage the fear of abandonment by taking control of the relationship's pace and boundaries. By initiating distance, they feel like they are choosing separation on their own terms, rather than being abandoned by someone else. This perceived control is comforting, even though it perpetuates the cycle of emotional distance. Yet, the irony is that this self-imposed isolation can increase the very fears avoidants are trying to avoid. The longer they stay in no contact, the more they experience loneliness and anxiety. This can create a push to reconnect, often in ways that are confusing or inconsistent. Avoidants may reach out when they feel vulnerable or scared, only to pull back again when the emotional intensity rises. This seesaw pattern between connection and withdrawal is exhausting for everyone involved. This cycle can also make it difficult for avoidants to develop deeper emotional intimacy. Their fear of abandonment makes vulnerability feel risky, while their need for independence makes closeness feel threatening. Because of this, they often keep relationships at a safe emotional distance, where connection exists but never fully deepens. No contact becomes a tool to maintain this distance, preventing the relationship from evolving into something more vulnerable and connected. For partners and loved ones, understanding this push-pull dynamic is crucial. When an avoidant pulls away or initiates no contact, it can feel like rejection or a lack of love. But often, it's actually a sign of internal conflict and fear. Recognizing that the avoidant's need for independence and fear of abandonment coexist can help create compassion and patience. Instead of interpreting distance as disinterest, partners can see it as a protective response to complex emotions. This awareness also highlights the importance of communication and setting healthy boundaries. Avoidants need space to feel safe, but too much distance can deepen isolation and fear. Finding a balance where independence is respected while maintaining connection is key. This often requires both parties to develop emotional awareness and coping skills. Avoidants learning to tolerate vulnerability and partners learning to give space without withdrawing emotionally. Moreover, the fear of abandonment hidden beneath the surface explains why avoidants might struggle with trust. They may question others' intentions, doubt the stability of relationships, or worry about being left unexpectedly. These fears drive behaviors like withdrawing or using no contact as a defensive measure. Addressing these trust issues often requires gentle reassurance and consistent patient support from loved ones, as well as self-reflection and healing work from the avoidant. The dynamic between independence and fear of abandonment also shapes how avoidants handle conflict. Rather than addressing issues directly, they may choose silence or withdrawal to avoid confrontation and emotional discomfort. While this strategy feels safer in the short term, it prevents resolution and can leave problems festering. Over time, unresolved conflicts contribute to emotional distance, reinforcing the avoidant's belief that closeness is dangerous. Breaking this cycle takes courage and self-awareness. Avoidants must learn that true independence doesn't mean emotional isolation, but the ability to be emotionally present without losing themselves. They need to understand that vulnerability is not a weakness, but a necessary part of meaningful relationships. This means facing fears of abandonment head-on and learning to trust both themselves and others. At the same time, partners and friends can support this process by providing consistent, non-judgmental presence. Showing that closeness can coexist with respect for autonomy helps avoidants feel safer to lower their defenses. Over time, this can help them move beyond no contact as a coping mechanism and toward healthier, more fulfilling ways of relating. In essence, the addiction to no contact among avoidants is rooted in the complex interplay between their need for independence and their hidden fear of abandonment. This paradox creates a cycle of distance and reconnection that serves as both a protective strategy and a barrier to intimacy. Understanding and addressing this dynamic is key to breaking free from isolation and building relationships based on trust, safety, and genuine connection. Avoidants often use no contact as a way to avoid dealing with emotional pain, but what's crucial to understand is that this avoidance doesn't equate to genuine healing. Instead, no contact can become a form of emotional escape that delays confronting the deeper wounds and unresolved issues that keep them trapped in cycles of withdrawal and disconnection. This pattern of avoidance can prevent true growth and healing, even though it might feel like self-care or taking necessary space. When an avoidant cuts off communication or withdraws, they create a buffer zone where uncomfortable feelings are muted or ignored. This space allows them to avoid facing the root causes of their pain, whether it's fear of rejection, low self-worth, or past traumas. By stepping away, they temporarily silence the emotional turmoil, but those feelings don't disappear. Instead, they linger beneath the surface, unprocessed and unresolved, waiting to resurface later, often with renewed intensity. This avoidance can give the illusion that time alone will heal wounds naturally, but without active engagement with emotions, healing is unlikely to happen. Emotional pain is complex and layered, requiring attention, reflection, and sometimes the help of others to process effectively. No contact can create a false sense of progress because the absence of emotional triggers reduces distress temporarily. However, the underlying issues remain untouched, meaning the avoidant is not truly healing, but simply postponing the work needed. Furthermore, the avoidance of emotional pain through no contact often reinforces harmful beliefs that keep avoidants stuck. For example, they may believe that vulnerability leads to harm, that others cannot be trusted, or that emotional needs are burdensome. These beliefs are rarely challenged during periods of silence because avoidants aren't engaging in the relational dynamics that would test and potentially disprove these assumptions. Without confrontation and dialogue, negative patterns and distorted self-perceptions remain intact. The longer an avoidant stays in avoidance, the more entrenched these beliefs become. This makes it harder for them to trust others or themselves with their emotions in the future. Instead of growing from past experiences, they learn to associate emotional closeness with pain and retreat. This perpetuates a cycle where no contact becomes a default mode of self-protection, rather than a conscious choice for healthy boundary setting. Additionally, the use of no contact as avoidance can strain relationships and create misunderstandings. The people on the receiving end may feel abandoned, confused, or hurt by the silence. When avoidants use distance to avoid pain, they inadvertently cause pain to others. This can lead to cycles of conflict, where the avoidant withdraws to protect themselves and the partner responds with frustration or pursuit, escalating tensions. These dynamics rarely foster healing. Instead, they reinforce patterns of avoidance and mistrust. True healing for avoidance requires moving beyond avoidance into engagement with their emotional world. This doesn't mean diving headfirst into vulnerability without support, but gradually building the capacity to sit with discomfort and uncertainty. It means learning to recognize and name emotions rather than suppressing or dismissing them. It involves developing tools to regulate intense feelings and practicing openness in relationships where safety is established. Therapeutic support can be particularly valuable in this process. Therapy provides a structured and safe environment to explore past wounds, challenge unhelpful beliefs, and develop healthier ways of relating to oneself and others. Avoidants can learn that emotional pain, while uncomfortable, is not intolerable or dangerous. Through this work, they can replace avoidance with curiosity and compassion, paving the way for authentic connection and growth. Furthermore, healing involves reshaping the internal narrative that equates emotional closeness with loss of control. Avoidance can begin to see vulnerability as strength and connection as a source of resilience rather than weakness. This shift allows them to engage more fully with relationships, reducing the need for withdrawal and silence as coping mechanisms. For those in relationships with avoidance, understanding this dynamic is essential. Recognizing that no contact is often an avoidance of pain rather than a rejection can foster empathy and patience. Supporting an avoidant partner in their healing journey means encouraging gentle engagement with emotions, validating their experience, and creating consistent safety. It also involves setting clear boundaries to avoid being caught in cycles of pursuit and withdrawal. Ultimately, the avoidance of emotional pain through no contact is a barrier to healing, not a pathway. While it may provide temporary relief, it does not address the underlying wounds that fuel avoidant behavior. True healing arises when avoidants begin to face their emotional pain with courage and support, learning that vulnerability is a vital part of growth and connection. This process frees them from the cycle of withdrawal and allows for deeper, more meaningful relationships. In summary, no contact as a tool of avoidance delays emotional healing by providing a temporary escape from pain rather than engaging with it. Avoidance must move beyond this pattern to process unresolved wounds and reshape their relationship with vulnerability and connection. Only then can they break free from cycles, isolation, and build healthier, more fulfilling emotional lives. In the end, the avoidance addiction to no contact is much more than just a desire for space. It's a complex dance between fear and control, independence and connection, safety and vulnerability. Understanding this struggle helps us see that no contact is often a protective shield born from deep-seated fears and past wounds, rather than a simple rejection of intimacy. True healing and growth come when avoidants learn to embrace discomfort, lean into vulnerability, and rewrite their story about what it means to connect with others. For both avoidants and those who love them, patience, compassion, and honest communication are the keys to breaking free from this cycle, opening the door to healthier relationships built on trust, presence, and genuine emotional connection.